Good morning, church. I hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy. Quick announcement here. VBS teachers, we're going to have a meeting March the 24th. That's going to be after services this Sunday. And also we have a Friday night sing coming up at Norval Park Church of Christ. And that's going to be at 7 p.m. And that's going to be on April 5th. 7th Street is also hosting a quarterly potluck. That's going to be at the Reeker Building, April the 7th. And services will follow the potluck at 2 p.m. So we hope to see everyone there. We hope to have everyone there with us, have a little bit of fellowship, and just have a wonderful time. But getting into what we're talking about this morning, we're moving on to that next kind of theme, that key theme in the book of Ecclesiastes. And this key theme that we're talking about today is called the vanity of life. Now, if you've read any of Ecclesiastes, or at least the first part of Ecclesiastes, we can see that the preacher or the author really, really has some issue with some of the things that go on in the world. He says, all is vanity, and that's kind of the title of this section, as well as other sections. But he starts off chapter 1, and he also brings this up again in chapter 12, in verse 8, where he says, "Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities. All is vanity." And we see this word pop up a number of times throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. Vanity is such an interesting word that we may not fully understand in this specific context. And what I mean by that is that within our own context, within our own world, we typically define the word vanity as excessive pride or admiration in one's own appearance or achievements. Kind of, that self-righteousness sort of mindset. And we use it in place of words like narcissist or conceit or, words like that. Talking about somebody who's puffed up, somebody who kind of puts themselves above other people, or that they're better than everybody else. Kind of that idea. But within the book of Ecclesiastes, we're not actually using the right definition when we use that specific definition, because there's a second definition that we may not be aware of with the word vanity. And the one here, the second one that we're going to be talking about is one that more closely lines up with the Greek and Hebrew word, which is mateotes and hebel, meaning more along the lines of the word vapor. It'd be more literally vapor. And this kind of gives us the idea that it gives us the image of something that is fleeting or just pointless, simply. And our preacher is claiming that all is vanity, and we get this rather extensive list of vanities. In fact, we get a couple of different lists. In the first list we get, moving throughout the first chapter, first and second chapter really, is the natural world, the vanity of the natural world, the vanity of wisdom, the vanity of knowledge, vanity of pleasures, vanity of possessions, accomplishments, labor. And in the second list, we see more of these vanities, which is mortal life, labor, and more on the vanity of wisdom. What's interesting is the vanity of wisdom comes up 2 or 3 different times within these lists, which is quite fascinating, because what we would typically think of when it comes to wisdom, we would see value and importance in having wisdom, because that wisdom we see as important and hard earned. But here we have this preacher, this author, talking about how wisdom is just vapor. It's pointless. It's useless. It's vanity. And I think to get a better understanding of the word vanity and why it's being used, why we apply that fleeting or pointless definition, we have to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, if we start there in verse 29, I think we start to see a little bit more about what we're talking about and how this really applies to us. And we get that understanding a little bit clearer. So if we start there in verse 29, it says, "This is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they have none, and those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away." What's really interesting here is that we see Paul talking about how the appointed time has come, and it's growing very short. But then we also see this: those who have wives live as though they have none. Those who mourn as though they were not mourning. Those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing. Those who buy as though they had no goods to buy. And those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with them at all. And it's really interesting the way Paul goes about this. And if we don't include the context, it could be very easy to misunderstand. But here we have Paul writing to the Corinthian church about the return of Christ and our responsibilities. Paul is reminding his fellow Christians the necessity of continuing in everyday affairs. Because with the appointed time growing near, it's easy for Christians to kind of just, well, since Jesus is near, I'm not going to deal with the world because the world is not important. What's important is Christ. And that is very true, but what happens is people were giving up their jobs, people were giving up everything, and then when Christ did not return that very minute, they were kind of in a much tougher situation. Paul considers, as we all should, all time from the cross beyond. So from the cross to now and even into the future, he considers this to be the last days, as we all should. And he counsels Christians to always live in the light of Christ. And we know that Jesus is going to return, and so we live in the light of Christ until that return. The issue that we sometimes have is that we don't know when Jesus is going to return. We have no idea when that day is going to be. It very well could be today. It could be before I finish this video. But we do know that it is coming. We just don't know the time or the day. So even though we are living in the last days, we are still to continue living our lives and taking care of our worldly responsibilities as well as our Christian responsibilities. Now, our Christian responsibilities take a higher priority because Christ has to be that top priority. He has to be above all in our lives. But we still have our worldly responsibilities. We still need a job. We still need money. We still need to pay taxes. We still need to do all of our things that we need to do according to the world. But we also have that responsibility above all through Christ. The point that Paul is really trying to make here is that the form of the world itself and its daily affairs are not eternal. But while we don't know the time or the day of Christ's return, we're to still prioritize these worldly things accordingly. So it's still important for us to maintain our worldly homes for now. Now, is it more important than dedicating our lives to Christ? No. But there is still a necessity in having that home. Providing a roof, providing shelter for our children, putting food on the table, that sort of thing. So there's still a necessity in doing certain things, but letting those responsibilities become a greater priority than following Christ is where we start to take issue. That's where we start to have problems arising. We're supposed to be placing Christ above all, and we take care of our worldly responsibilities as well. They are priorities, but they fall below Christ and his commands. So they're important, but not as important as Jesus. So we see that balance of priorities. And as we're kind of wrapping everything up here this morning, we can see the preacher express his frustration, his anger, or sorrow, and we can apply all of this to his search for understanding of all things. It indicates something that is still incomprehensible or inscrutable to him, something that he doesn't fully understand. And the book presents itself, the book of Ecclesiastes presents itself as primarily this quest to figure out all of life, which we learn that life itself is a vapor. But Christ and his love will always remain. Christ and his love is eternal. Instead of this life and the knowledge of this world and the wisdom of this world, tongues will cease, prophecies will stop, wisdom will die out, knowledge will die out, but Christ's love will remain. God's love will remain. And that's where we really start to understand things. There at the end, we see the preacher kind of summing up what he's been talking about. There in chapter 1, verses 16 to 18, it says, I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases in knowledge increases in sorrow. I really appreciate what the preacher is saying here, because what we see is that those who increase in experience and wisdom and knowledge really come to, especially knowledge and wisdom in Christ, really come to understand how far it is that we've fallen from God. I hope this helps us understand a little bit more about the vanity of life, and as we continue through the book of Ecclesiastes, we really begin to see how far the world has fallen as a result of sin. The preacher's words there in 1:18 really sum things up for this key theme. Wisdom and knowledge bring us this vexation and sorrow. And this is because we understand the pointlessness of living a life of sin. We understand a life without Christ, a life without God, is absolutely pointless. We know where it leads, and it pushes us all the more to Christ. And I want to encourage you all to share the truth with everyone around you. Set that Christ-like example. And I hope this kind of encourages us to continue in our own studies and continue growing in knowledge and truth. I hope to see you next week as we tackle the next key theme, sin and death. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and God bless.